Ever feel like the cybersecurity world is changing faster than anyone can keep up with? I mean, it's practically a digital Wild West out there,
It really is.
with new threats constantly popping up. Like every time you turn around, there's a new scam to watch out for.
Absolutely.
But today we're going deeper than the headlines. We're really going to try to understand the who behind all of these digital attacks.
It's like that old saying, know your enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Because in cybersecurity, if you can understand who you're up against, their motivations, skill sets, resources, that's half the battle.
I see what you mean.
Definitely.
And it's interesting because our source material, Exploring Security Threats, actually talks about how much the threat landscape has changed. Like, remember back in the day when cybersecurity threats were mostly just, tech-savvy teenagers messing
All
around?
goes for the days.
Right, but it's a completely different story now. Our source material really paints this picture of, like, skilled technologists, organized crime rings, even government-backed attackers all competing in cyberspace.
Yeah, and I think what's so fascinating about how cybersecurity has evolved is that it really mirrors traditional warfare in a way.
Oh, how so?
Well, we've gone from these isolated skirmishes to this complex web of state-sponsored actors and proxy battles. But instead of bullets, they're using code as their weapons.
Wow, I never thought about it like that.
And that's really why we need to be talking about this more, because individuals and companies, they're literally on the front lines of a geopolitical conflict that's playing out in cyberspace.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So how do we even begin to make sense of this new reality? I mean, how do you even classify all these wildly different players in the cyber world?
Well, it's a little bit like criminal profiling,
Okay.
but for the digital age,
Mm-hmm.
So we look at things like their sophistication, their resources, and most importantly, their intent.
Okay, let's unpack that. So sophistication first.
Sure.
We're talking about like the skill level of these attackers.
Exactly.
Yep.
So on one end of the spectrum, you've got your script kiddies,
Okay.
and they're basically just using pre-made hacking tools. Like, imagine somebody who's following a recipe instead of cooking from scratch.
So not exactly master chefs of the digital world.
Right. Not quite. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have groups called Advanced Persistent Threats, or APTs.
And APTs are like the pros, right?
Exactly.
Like the Michelin star chefs who can whip up a zero-day exploit before you can even say cybersecurity.
You got it. They're highly skilled, often have significant financial backing,
Wow.
and they develop their own custom-built tools and exploits. It's like if you imagined a fortress that seems impossible to break into.
Okay.
They're the ones who can find, like, a secret passage that no one else even knows exists.
Oh, wow, I see.
Yeah.
So we've got like these lone wolves with limited skills on one side,
Right.
and then these highly organized and well-funded teams on the other.
Exactly.
And that brings us to resources, right? Because all the skill in the world won't get you very far if you don't have the computing power or the money or the infrastructure to carry out these attacks.
You're absolutely right. And the resources available to these attackers, it's just as varied as their skill levels. We're talking about anything from a single computer in someone's basement to botnets, which are networks of infected computers,
Oh, right.
capable of launching huge attacks. And then, of course, you can't forget about financial resources.
Right.
Some groups have access to basically unlimited funds.
It's crazy to think about.
It is. It is.
The difference in the scale and complexity of the attacks they could launch.
Yeah.
And our source material really emphasizes this contrast between, like, a hobbyist working in their spare time versus an organization with, like, a nation state backing them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what kind of damage could they inflict?
Well, just imagine a group that has, like, the resources of an entire nation state behind them.
It's kind of scary to think about.
It is. It is.
Like, they could cripple our critical infrastructure,
Oh, easily.
disrupt financial systems, maybe even influence elections?
Absolutely.
It's a whole different ballgame.
It is.
Okay, so we've talked about their skills. We've talked about the resources they have, the tools of their trade, so to speak.
Right.
But what are they after? I mean, what is the motivation behind all of these attacks?
Well, I mean, just like with any population, you're going to have a wide range of motivations in cyberspace.
That makes sense.
So some people are in it for the money.
Okay.
Like they're trying to steal credit card numbers or engage in ransomware attacks.
Right.
But then you have others who are driven by ideology.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like think of hacktivists who are trying to expose corruption or maybe advance some kind of political agenda.
So it's not always about financial gain.
No, not at all.
Interesting.
Some attackers are motivated by espionage.
Okay.
So they're trying to steal government secrets or trade secrets from companies.
Right?
And then, of course, you have those who they seem to thrive on chaos.
Oh, right.
They just want to, like, disrupt critical services just to prove they can.
Just to watch the world burn.
Exactly.
It can be a little unnerving to think about, to be honest.
It can be. It can be.
So is there a way to, like, categorize these motivations? How do we even begin to make sense of the why behind the hack?
Well, one way is to think about it in terms of their goals.
Okay.
Like, are they trying to make money? Are they trying to just disrupt operations? Or are they trying to steal information?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Another helpful framework is the classic, although sometimes debated, hacker hat analogy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard of that. Like the white hat, black hat?
Exactly. Yeah. White hat, black hat, gray hat.
Okay, so break that down for me.
Okay. So imagine like the Wild West,
Okay.
but instead of cowboys and saloons, it's lines of code and servers.
Okay.
So in this digital frontier, you've got your white hat hackers, and they're the good guys, the ethical hackers.
So they're using their powers for good.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
So they use their skills to find vulnerabilities, but they do it with permission.
All right.
So think of them like cybersecurity consultants. Like a company might hire them to test their defenses.
Right, like ethical bug bounty hunters.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
So then you have your black hat hackers.
And those are the ones that are a little less friendly?
Yeah, they're the outlaws.
Okay.
These are your cyber criminals. They're motivated by personal gain, whether it's financial profit, maybe revenge, or just the thrill of wreaking havoc.
Right.
And they operate outside the law.
Of course.
And their actions can have really serious consequences.
Yeah.
And then you've got your gray hat hackers.
And they're the ones that make things a little more complicated.
Exactly.
Because they're not really the good guys, but they're not necessarily the bad guys either.
Right. They operate in like this moral gray area.
Okay.
They might publicly expose a vulnerability in a system, but they didn't have permission to do it.
Oh, okay.
But they did it, often they say, to try to force companies to improve their security.
So their intentions might be good, but their methods are.
Exactly. They walk this fine line between ethical hacking and illegal activity.
Right.
And sometimes their actions can have these unintended consequences.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that story about that security researcher who found a vulnerability in, I think it was a popular social media platform. And, he alerted the company,
Okay.
but then he went public with it before they could fix it.
Oh, wow.
And his argument was that the public had a right to know.
Right.
But then some people argued that he actually put users at risk by doing that.
It's a perfect example, really, of this gray area that these hackers operate in,
Oh.
It shows just how complex cybersecurity is. It's not always so simple as just good guys versus bad guys.
Definitely not.
It's much more nuanced than that.
It's much more nuanced than that. It's like they're almost like vigilantes.
Yeah.
But in the digital world.
Exactly. Digital vigilantes with keyboards.
Right, right.
And it really brings up some interesting questions about who polices cyberspace.
Yep.
And how do we balance security with individual freedoms?
Right, right.
It's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, that's a whole other deep dive.
Exactly.
Maybe we'll have to explore that another time.
Definitely.
But for now, I kind of want to bring it back to what you were talking about earlier.
Okay.
About how understanding these different actors, it actually helps us make sense of the real world cyber attacks that we see happening all the time.
Absolutely.
It's like you're giving us the tools to be like cyber detectives.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, for example, let's say you read about a ransomware attack that's targeted a major hospital.
Okay.
Knowing what we now know about cybercriminals,
Right.
that a lot of them are motivated by financial gain,
Hmm.
helps you understand why a hospital would be such a prime target.
Of course.
Because they have all this critical data, all these critical systems.
Absolutely.
And that makes them a really, lucrative target for these kinds of attacks.
Exactly.
So it's not just about, like, reacting to threats after they happen.
Right.
But it's about understanding the motives of these attackers, their methods.
Yes.
So you can hopefully anticipate what they might do next.
You got it. It's all about connecting the dots, spotting patterns, asking the right questions, like who benefits from this attack? What tactics did they use?
Right.
And by applying this kind of framework, that's how we can start to anticipate and hopefully mitigate these threats in the future.
So what you're saying is, by understanding the who and the why behind these attacks, we can all be a little bit more prepared to navigate this increasingly complex digital world.
100%. Knowledge is power, especially in cyberspace. The more we understand these actors, their motivations, their tactics, because they're always evolving, the better equipped we'll be to protect ourselves, our data, our systems, everything.
It's like learning a whole new language.
It is. It
This
is.
language of cybersecurity.
I like that.
Well, I feel like I learned a lot today. I feel like I'm looking at cybersecurity through a whole new lens after this deep dive.
It's been great exploring all this with you.
Yeah, you do
Yeah.
have. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on the world of cyber threats because, like we've been saying, it is constantly changing.
All the time.
But remember, it's not just about having the latest software or, the best firewalls.
All right.
It's about staying informed, asking the right questions,
Hmm.
and maybe channeling your inner cyber detective a little
Absolutely.
bit, right?
Yes.
All right. Until next time, everyone, stay curious and stay safe out there.